An earthworm is a soil-dwelling terrestrial invertebrate that belongs to the phylum Annelida. The term is the common name for the largest members of the class or subclass, depending on the author Oligochaeta. In classical systems, they were in the order of Opisthosoma, since the male pores open posterior to the female pores, although the internal male segments are anterior to the female. Theoretical cladistic studies have placed them in the suborder Lumbricines of the order Hoplocarida, but this may change. Clarification needed. Other slang names for earthworms include dewworm, rainworm, nightcrawler, and angleworm from its use as angling hook baits. Larger terrestrial earthworms are also called megadriles, which translates to big worms, as opposed to the microdriles small worms in the semiaquatic families Tubificidae, Lumbricidae, and Enchytraeid, and a vascular system with true capillaries. Earthworms are commonly found in moist, compost-rich soil, eating a wide variety of organic matters, which include detritus, living protozoa, rotifers, nematodes, bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms. An earthworm's digestive system runs the length of its body. They are one of nature's most important depredivores and coprophages, and also serve as food for many low-level consumers within the ecosystems. Earthworms exhibit an externally segmented tube-within-a-tube body plan with corresponding internal segmentations, and usually have seta on all segments. They have a cosmopolitan distribution wherever soil, water, and temperature conditions allow. They have a double transport system made of coelomic fluid that moves within the fluid-filled coelom, and a simple, closed circulatory system, and respire-breathe via cutaneous respiration. As soft-bodied invertebrates, they lack a true skeleton, but their structure is maintained by fluid-filled coelom chambers that function as a hydrostatic skeleton. Citation needed. Earthworms have a central nervous system consisting of two ganglia above the mouth, one on either side, connected to an axial nerve running along its length to motor neurons and sensory cells in each segment. Large numbers of chemoreceptors concentrate near its mouth. Circumferential and longitudinal muscles edging each segment let the worm move. Form and function: earthworm head. Depending on the species, an adult earthworm can be from 10 mm (0.39 in long and 1 mm (0.039 in wide to 3 meters (9.8 feet long and over 25 mm (0.98 in wide. But the typical Lumbricus terrestris grows to about 360 mm (14 in long. Probably the longest worm on confirmed records is Amynthas mecongenus that extends up to 3 meters 10 feet in the mud along the banks of the 4,350 kilometers 2,703 miles Mekong River in Southeast Asia. From front to back, the basic shape of the earthworm is a cylindrical tube, divided into a series of segments called metameres that compartmentalize the body. Furrows are generally externally visible on the body, demarking the segments. Dorsal pores and nephridiopores exude a fluid that moistens and protects the worm's surface, allowing it to breathe. Except for the mouth and anal segments, each segment carries bristle-like hairs called lateral seta, used to anchor parts of the body during movement. Species may have for pairs of seta on each segment or more than 8, sometimes forming a complete circle of seta per segment. Special ventral seta are used to anchor mating earthworms by their penetration into the bodies of their mates. Generally, within a species, the number of segments found is consistent across specimens, and individuals are born with the number of segments they will have throughout their lives. The first body segment number 1 features both the earthworm's mouth and overhang the mouth, a fleshy lobe called the prostomium, which shields the entrance when the worm is at rest, but is also used to feel and chemically sense the worm's surroundings. Some species of earthworm can even use the prehensile prostomium to grab and drag items, such as grasses and leaves, into their burrow. An adult earthworm develops a belt-shaped glandular swelling, called the clitellum, which covers several segments toward the front part of the animal. This is part of the reproductive system and produces egg capsules. The posterior is most commonly cylindrical like the rest of the body, but depending on the species, it may also be quadrangular, octagonal, trapezoidal, or flattened. The last segment is called the periproct. The earthworm's anus, a short vertical slit, is found on this segment. A segment of an earthworm posterior to the clitellum, including all of the segmental structures. The exterior of an individual segment is a thin cuticle over the skin, commonly pigmented red to brown, which has specialized cells that secrete mucus over the cuticle to keep the body moist and ease movement through the soil. Under the skin is a layer of nerve tissue, and 2 layers of muscles with an outer layer of circular muscle, and a much thicker inner layer of longitudinal muscle. 15 anterior to the muscle layer is a fluid-filled chamber called a coelum 16 that by its pressurization provides structure to the worm's boneless body. The segments are separated from each other by septa, the plural of septum, which are perforated transverse walls, allowing the coelomic fluid to pass between segments. A pair of structures called nephrostomes are located at the back of each septum. A nephric tubule leads from each nephrostome through the septum and into the following segment. This tubule then leads to the main body fluid filtering organ, the nephridium or metanephridium, which removes metabolic waste from the coelomic fluid and expels it through pores, called nephridiopores, on the worm's sides. Usually, 2 nephridia, sometimes more, are found in most segments. At the center of a worm is the digestive tract, which runs straight through from mouth to anus without coiling, and is flanked above and below by blood vessels, the dorsal blood vessel and the ventral blood vessel, as well as a subneural blood vessel and the ventral nerve cord, and is surrounded in each segment by a pair of pallial blood vessels that connect the dorsal to the subneural blood vessels. Many earthworms can eject coelomic fluid through pores in the back in response to stress. The Australian Didymogaster sylvaticus, known as the blue squirter earthworm, can squirt fluid as high as 30 centimeters 12 in. Nervous system of the anterior end of an earthworm. Central nervous system. The CNS consists of a bilobed brain cerebral ganglia, or suprapharyngeal ganglion, subpharyngeal ganglia, circumpharyngeal connectives, and a ventral nerve cord. Earthworms' brains consist of a pair of pear-shaped cerebral ganglia. These are located in the dorsal side of the alimentary canal in the 3rd segment, in a groove between the buccal cavity and pharynx. A pair of circumpharyngeal connectives from the brain encircle the pharynx, and then connect with a pair of subpharyngeal ganglia located below the pharynx in the 4th segment. This arrangement means the brain, subpharyngeal ganglia, and the circumpharyngeal connectives form a nerve ring around the pharynx. The ventral nerve cord formed by nerve cells and nerve fibers begins at the subpharyngeal ganglia and extends below the alimentary canal to the most posterior body segment. The ventral nerve cord has a swelling, or ganglion, in each segment, i.e. a segmental ganglion, which occurs from the 5th to the last segment of the body. There are also 3 giant axons, 1 medial giant axon MGA and 2 lateral giant axons LGAs on the mid-dorsal side of the ventral nerve cord. The MGA is 0.07 millimeters in diameter and transmits in an anterior-posterior direction at a rate of 30 to 0.2 meters per second. The LGAs are slightly narrower at 0.05 millimeters in diameter and transmit in a posterior-anterior direction at 12.6 meters per second. The 2 LGAs are connected at regular intervals along the body and are therefore considered 1 giant axon. Peripheral nervous system. 8 to 10 nerves arise from the cerebral ganglia to supply the prostomium, buccal chamber, and pharynx. 3 pairs of nerves arise from the subpharyngeal ganglia to supply the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th segment. 3 pairs of nerves extend from each segmental ganglion to supply various structures of the segment. The sympathetic nervous system consists of nerve plexuses in the epidermis and alimentary canal. A plexus is a web of connected nerve cells. The nerves that run along the body wall pass between the outer circular and inner longitudinal muscle layers of the wall. They give off branches that form the intermuscular plexus and the subepidermal plexus. These nerves connect with the cricopharyngeal connective. Movement, a profile SEM image of Lumbricus terrestris setter. Small bristle-like projections that facilitate movement by anchoring the earthworm in the soil. An earthworm crawling over asphalt. On the surface, crawling speed varies both within and among individuals. Earthworms crawl faster primarily by taking longer strides and a greater frequency of strides. Larger Lumbricus terrestris worms crawl at a greater absolute speed than smaller worms. They achieve this by taking slightly longer strides, but with slightly lower stride frequencies. Touching an earthworm, which causes a pressure response as well as often a response to the dehydrating quality of the salt on human skin toxic to earthworms, stimulates the subepidermal nerve plexus, which connects to the intermuscular plexus and causes the longitudinal muscles to contract. This causes the writhing movements observed when a human picks up an earthworm. This behavior is a reflex and does not require the CNS. It occurs even if the nerve cord is removed. Each segment of the earthworm has its own nerve plexus. The plexus of one segment is not connected directly to that of adjacent segments. The nerve cord is required to connect the nervous systems of the segments. The giant axons carry the fastest signals along the nerve cord. These are emergency signals that initiate reflex escape behaviors. The larger dorsal giant axon conducts signals the fastest from the rear to the front of the animal. If the rear of the worm is touched, a signal is rapidly sent forwards, causing the longitudinal muscles in each segment to contract. This causes the worm to shorten very quickly as an attempt to escape from a predator or other potential threat. The two medial giant axons connect with each other and send signals from the front to the rear. Stimulation of these causes the earthworm to very quickly retreat, perhaps contracting into its burrow to escape a bird. The presence of a nervous system is essential for an animal to be able to experience nociception or pain. However, other physiological capacities are also required, such as opioid sensitivity and central modulation of responses by analgesics. Enkephalin and alpha-endorphin-like substances have been found in earthworms. Injections of naloxone and opioid antagonists inhibit the escape responses of earthworms. This indicates that opioid substances play a role in sensory modulation, similar to that found in many vertebrates. Sensory reception, photosensitivity. See also photosensitivity. Although some worms have eyes, earthworms do not. However, they do have specialized photosensitive cells called light cells of Hess. These photoreceptor cells have a central intracellular cavity, phylum, filled with microvilli. As well as the microvilli, there are several sensory cilia in the phylum, which are structurally independent of the microvilli. The photoreceptors are distributed in most parts of the epidermis, but are more concentrated on the back and sides of the worm. A relatively small number occur on the ventral surface of the first segment. They are most numerous in the prostomium and reduce in density in the first three segments. They are very few in number past the third segment. Epidermal receptor sense organ. These receptors are abundant and distributed all over the epidermis. Each receptor shows a slightly elevated cuticle, which covers a group of tall, slender, and columnar receptor cells. These cells bear small hair-like processes at their outer ends, and their inner ends are connected with nerve fibers. The epidermal receptors are tactile in function. They are also concerned with changes in temperature and respond to chemical stimuli. Earthworms are extremely sensitive to touch and mechanical vibration. Buccal receptor sense organ. These receptors are located only in the epithelium of the buccal chamber. These receptors are gustatory and olfactory, related to taste and smell. They also respond to chemical stimuli. Chemoreceptor. The pharynx acts as a suction pump. Its muscular walls draw in food. In the pharynx, the pharyngeal glands secrete mucus. Food moves into the esophagus, where calcium from the blood and ingested from previous meals is pumped in to maintain proper blood calcium levels in the blood and food pH. From there, the food passes into the crop and gizzard. In the gizzard, strong muscular contractions grind the food with the help of mineral particles ingested along with the food. Once through the gizzard, food continues through the intestine for digestion. The intestine secretes pepsin to digest proteins, amylase to digest polysaccharides, cellulase to digest cellulose, and liposide to digest fats. Earthworms use, in addition to the digestive proteins, a class of surface active compounds called drillidefensins, which help digest plant material. 29. Instead of being coiled like a mammalian intestine. In the earthworm's intestine, a large mid-dorsal, tongue-like fold is present, called a typhlosyl, with many folds running along its length, increasing its surface area to increase nutrient absorption. The intestine has its own pair of muscle layers like the body, but in reverse order: an inner circular layer within an outer longitudinal layer. Circulatory system. Earthworms have a dual circulatory system in which both the coelomic fluid and a closed circulatory system carry the food, waste, and respiratory gases. The closed circulatory system has 5 main blood vessels: the dorsal top vessel, which runs above the digestive tract; the ventral bottom vessel, which runs below the digestive tract; the subneural vessel, which runs below the ventral nerve cord; and two lateroneural vessels on either side of the nerve cord. The dorsal vessel is mainly a collecting structure in the intestinal region. It receives a pair commissural and dorsal intestines in each segment. The ventral vessel branches off to a pair of ventrotegumentaries and ventrointestinals in each segment. The subneural vessel also gives out a pair of commissurals running along the posterior surface of the septum. The pumping action on the dorsal vessel moves the blood forward, while the other 4 longitudinal vessels carry the blood rearward. In segments 7 through 11, a pair of aortic arches ring the coelom and acts as hearts, pumping the blood to the ventral vessel that acts as the aorta. The blood consists of amboid cells and hemoglobin dissolved in the plasma. The second circulatory system derives from the cells of the digestive system that line the coelom. As the digestive cells become, the excretory system contains a pair of nephridia in every segment, except for the first 3 and the last ones. The 3 types of nephridia are integumentary, septal, and pharyngeal. The integumentary nephridia lie attached to the inner side of the body wall, all segments except the first 2. The septal nephridia are attached to both sides of the septa behind the 15th segment. The pharyngeal nephridia are attached to the 4th, 5th, and 6th segments. The waste in the coelom fluid from a forward segment is drawn in by the beating of cilia of the nephrostome. From there it is carried through the septum wall via a tube which forms a series of loops entwined by blood capillaries that also transfer waste into the tubule of the nephrostome. The excretory wastes are then finally discharged through a pore on the worm side. Gases are exchanged through the moist skin and capillaries, where the oxygen is picked up by the hemoglobin dissolved in the blood plasma and carbon dioxide is released. Water, as well as salts, can also be moved through the skin by active transport. They attain full size in about 1 year. Scientists predict that the average lifespan under field conditions is 4 to 8 years, while most garden varieties live only 1 to 2 years. Reproduction: earthworm copulation, earthworm cocoons from L. terrestris, an earthworm cocoon from L. rubellus. Several common earthworm species are mostly parthenogenetic, meaning that growth and development of embryos happens without fertilization. Among Lumbricid earthworms, parthenogenesis arose from sexual relatives many times. Parthenogenesis in some Aparectidae trapezoids lineages arose 6.4 to 1.1 million years ago from sexual ancestors. A few species exhibit pseudogamous parthenogenesis, meaning that mating is necessary to stimulate reproduction, even though no male genetic material passes to the offspring. Earthworm mating occurs on the surface, most often at night. Earthworms have 1 or 2 pairs of testes contained within sacs. Outcrossing would provide the benefit of masking the expression of deleterious recessive mutations in progeny. 39C complementation. Copulation and reproduction are separate processes in earthworms. The clitellum becomes very reddish to pinkish in color. Sometime after copulation, long after the worms have separated, the clitellum behind the spermathecae secretes material which forms a ring around the worm. As the worm slips out of the ring, the ends of the cocoon seal to form a vaguely onion-shaped incubator cocoon in which the embryonic worms develop. Hence, fertilization is external. The cocoon is then deposited in the soil. After 3 weeks, 2 to 20 offspring hatch with an average of 4. Citation-needed development is direct, i.e. without formation of any larvae. Citation needed. DNA repair. exposure of the earthworm Eisenia fetida to ionizing radiation induced DNA strand breaks and oxidized DNA bases. 40. These DNA damages could then be repaired in somatic and spermatogenic cells. 40. Earthworms' testis cells are also capable of repairing hydrogen peroxide-induced oxidative DNA ducts. Locomotion. Close-up of an earthworm in garden soil. Earthworms travel underground by means of waves of muscular contractions, which alternately shorten and lengthen the body peristalsis. The shortened part is anchored to the surrounding soil by tiny claw-like bristles that are set along its segmented length. The whole burrowing process is aided by the secretion of lubricating mucus. As a result of their movement through their lubricated tunnels, worms can make gurgling noises underground when disturbed. Earthworms move through soil by expanding crevices with force. When forces are measured according to body weight, hatchlings can push 500 times their own body weight, whereas large adults can push only 10 times their own body weight. Regeneration. Earthworms have the ability to regenerate lost segments, but this ability varies between species and depends on the extent of the damage. Stevenson 1930 devoted a chapter of his monograph to this topic. Welge E. Gates spent 20 years studying regeneration in a variety of species, but because little interest was shown, Gates 1970 published only a few of his findings. These nevertheless show it is theoretically possible to grow to whole worms from a bisected specimen in certain species.